3 million oversubscribed and getting to 2 million in ARR. So person really understands how to build links with CVC. We introduced them to Banco Santander. We are going to do more of that as we go along. And Andrew, sometimes we are going to reach out to you when we are meeting other CVCs, especially if they're from Asia. Like we hosted one of the key investors of Escape Group, who we are going to host on 8th October again. Then CVC head of Sevastopol of Russia, he's coming in town and he's meeting us because one of our board members was a pioneer in investing from Russia. So when such people come, we view in also.
Recording in progress.
I just started the recording so that everybody knows. Welcome everybody this morning, and Casey will start doing the introductions. I just want to explain where I am today. I was invited to be a speaker on innovation in front of 2,000 under 30 youth here down on the East Coast at Disney. That's why we have the backdrop. We understand that Walt was one of the original entrepreneurs that understood trials and tribulations will only lead to success if you stick with it and do the right pivots. And Casey, my friend, the floor is yours.
Great. Axel, we cannot beat that background of Walt Disney, the shadow of Walt Disney, lurking behind our event. I think that's great. He's watching out for us, making sure we carry on the ingenuity and innovation, which this country and California is so uniquely the center of the world. And we have great innovators here like TDK Ventures. We have companies like Railkey and Telemetric. And last but not the least, we have US government representative who's sponsoring this event, Edgar from Tech Futures Group, NorCal SBDC. So once again, we are really blessed to have such amazing, bringing together such amazing people. Last but not the least, all the people who have signed up, all the entrepreneurs who are really endeavoring and persisting to carry the entrepreneurial spirit forward. And on that note, we are going to start by inviting Edgar Ceron from Tech Futures Group, U.S. government agency for uplifting the tech economy in Northern California, who's sponsoring this event, to give their vision of what the future will look like and how we can all co-create it together. So Edgar, floor is yours.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you, Axel, for hosting this wonderful event. My name is Edgar. I am the Associate Director at Tech Futures Group. Tech Futures Group is a program of the NorCal SBDC region, and our focus is helping tech companies at no cost. We take no equity, we take no cash for our services. We provide one-on-one mentoring and advising to technology companies with a focus of getting companies funded through private equity or government research grants. So I'll put in the chat more information on how you could take advantage of our services, get in contact with me, and take it away, Axel.
Great. And Edgar, why don't you also briefly say, you've had some recent initiatives where we see emails from you that you're going to introduce companies to, various VC funds like Sandal Angels, like various government departments who you've made connections with. Can you speak briefly about it? And is that a trend? Are you going to do that more and more?
Yes, actually, we've sort of shifted our I've been doing a lot of business development and trying to get more connections within ecosystem to help our clients. And like Casey said, we've made sort of good connections at angel groups, for example, Sand Hill Angels, MIT Angels, and US Angels, where we have a sort of a direct communication with them to present companies, put them in front of these groups. Also with the US Air Force. So any companies that are sort of interested in the Defense Department or working with the US Air Force, I'm sort of have a direct connection with them and sort of introducing them to our wonderful clients or clients that are interested. and most recently made a connection to the sort of a Hong Kong government. And any company that sort of wants to expand to Asia, they are another free resource that companies can sort of take advantage of and sort of connect them to us.
I think, Edgar, amongst these, the US government particularly, I think that's phenomenal and unique because others can't do it. So let us try to see other leads. One of the sometimes best leads come from our clients, and Pitch Global is about empowering people to help each other. And Telemetric is a good example because even though both founders of Cargo Chief and Telemetric both went to, Harvard around the same time, they met at Pitch Global and Cargo Chief became advisor to Telemetric. So like this, maybe Telemetric knows someone in some other department in the government. Because we are helping him, he may, help us get a lead of some other. So like this, we can start collecting and really make the ecosystem deeper. So we'll totally work with you on that. So, and any last comment on the Small Business Week for which is coming up next week? What is it all about?
Yeah, so next week SBDC is having Small Business Week, and it's various sort of events, webinars around sort of entrepreneurship and how sort of the U.S. government is helping sort of support that, and also they'll be sharing success stories the whole week. So I encourage to sort of either go on asbdc.com for all sort of event details that are going on next week.
That's great. Great, Edgar. Thanks for your support.
Let me just say one thing.
Sure.
The technology support that we received here, for one, the internet came from Disney. The sound and the video that I'm listening to is coming from a company called Alsa Sound, a very great young entrepreneur at heart. And without this, we couldn't even do this today. So I'm so grateful for everybody that chimed in that we can do Pitch Global today.
That's great. Axel, thanks for bringing that to our attention. Now we are going to go to the next part and briefly about the agenda for today. Today, the event will begin. This event is technically called how founders can build partnerships and how founders can create value and attract CVCs. Partnership is our next event. I've been ahead of the curve. So not partnership, how you can create value, because we have we have a deeper thread. The first event was how CVCs, how startups at all levels can attract CVCs. Now, if you had taken part in that level, now at least you are in the mindset of attracting CVCs. Today, you would learn how founders can build value and attract CVCs. Ultimately, it's all about building value, and value is what creates valuation, and it is also connected with your personal values, which makes you an entrepreneur. So that's today. And today's event, there will be 3 parts. First, we are going to get entrepreneurs' perspective. Second, we are going to get our mentor, Andrew Mawa of TDK Ventures, is going to give a presentation on today's topic, which is how founders can create value and attract CVCs. Then the third part is we have a guest CVC, Nathan Pascarella of Hypertherm Ventures, who we see there. Nathan, welcome. Who's we know through our board member, Jim Simmons, of co-chair of Caltech Angels. And he's going to do a chat with Andrew about the topic. And last but not the least, we have my fellow EIR from Pitch Global, Axel Tillman, who's here. He's going to give a presentation at the end on how we led the corporate innovation spin-off of Japanese conglomerate Ricoh, the trials and tribulations and ultimate success. So today we have a very heavy agenda. even though it would be less than 1.5 hours, but this is very condensed learning. So I hope everybody, you've had your cup of coffee. I'm still having mine. And on that note, I'm going to invite someone I know very well over the last 5 years. This gentleman is one of the most persistent entrepreneurs I have ever met, and by far the most well connected with investors. If I need connection with an investor in outside Bay Area, I call him because he just loves to build network with investors. So when he really needs funds, investors jump on his board. He just raised 3 million pre-seed and it was oversubscribed. They are prepping for Series A, and he is in talks with two CVCs for being lead investors. So it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome Christopher Hussain of Realkey. Christopher, are you there?
Yes. Hey, it's great to be
All
here.
right, perfect. So welcome on board. And I know you are a super project manager. You love everything correct. And I'm a big picture person. So obviously I don't get everything correct. So I'm going to read the script first to make sure I got everything.
Join the meeting.
And I haven't missed out anything. So let me take a look.
You're doing great.
Oh, I'm doing great. Great. If I have endorsement from you, I'm like, okay, my super project manager has given the thumbs up. But on that note, today it is about how to foster a mindset of value creation and attract CVC investors and entrepreneurs' perspective. So can you start off by first saying what is the exact innovation your company Realkey has created?
Yeah, so just to kind of give everybody a high-level overview of what Realkey is doing is we're really attacking the lending space. We're focused at the moment on mortgages, and I'm sure all of you have either gotten a mortgage or purchased a home recently, and for some of you, the process is wonderful. For the majority of you, it's probably very painful. And really what we're trying to do is take everything and bring all the different parties involved in the process and all the documents needed and the communication to a single platform so that your lending agent, title escrow, insurance, your employer, absolutely everybody is all able to communicate in a single platform and they have access and privacy based off of their role. And this is going to go through and eliminate all the back and forth emails and phone calls. And allow you to do everything where you can upload documents. The documents are analyzed through an OCR engine, and then AI is going through and figuring out what information and data was on there and is something else needed. That way, if your broker or lender is too busy, which is quite honestly all of them, if you try to call anybody right now, they're probably going to get their voicemail. Instead, the system's going to do everything for you, which is really going to be a huge time saving. And that gets passed on to consumers. And the AI engine is just going to keep getting better and better and even start going through and recommending things like what insurance company should you go through? What should you do with your homes? How can you add value to it, improve your credit, things of that sort.
Great. Christopher, can you share your background? Does your background help in creating the innovation and creative leap, or is it a deterrent?
You know me very well. So to give everybody a little bit of the background, we're doing mortgage tech, and my background is I was the top mortgage originator in the U.S. for 2 straight years. I'm the only person I know of that's actually originated in all 50 states, meaning actually originated, processed, and funded loans. And there's only a handful of people who's actually held a license in all 50. And then my last company, Syndio, was online mortgage brokerage that was venture backed and is now part of Freedom Financial. So very specifically, the experience definitely makes a very big difference. And that's allowed us to have a very distinct advantage over a lot of other technologies in the space that are either being created by individuals that don't have any mortgage experience and they have to learn on their investor's dollar. And for us, we've been able to move fairly quickly while at the same time having a great group of thought leaders in the technology space, from Oracle the guy who made taxes easy for you guys. So Intuit's design strategist and TurboTax's design lead, and then also having, people well connected in the space. We just got done with an accelerator with the fifth largest lender in the U.S., Flagstar Bank out in Michigan. So definitely makes a big difference having experience in the space.
So domain knowledge is very key for most innovation. Of course, sometimes...
Especially in fintech. Fintech is highly regulated. There's a lot of lingo that's used. Even all of our salespeople, it is enterprise SaaS sales, but we do have to know and understand all the tools and the lingo that's being used. You can't just grab somebody from Salesforce and expect them to sell a mortgage product on day one.
That's great, but this can still be complemented by a Mark Zuckerberg dropping out of college and starting the next big thing. So I think both has its merits. However, if it's attracting CVCs, then of course the domain has a larger than life impact. Now, can you explain how RealKey attracts partners?
Yeah, so for us, we've actually launched an updated product just a few months ago. And obviously it's intended users, the paying users are mortgage brokers and lenders. However, if you think about it, obviously as we're collecting documents, which is our focus, document collection, review, and communication amongst all the parties, that's why we've started partnering with insurance companies, title escrow companies, credit repair companies, starting to integrate with them. We actually have a large contract with Progressive Insurance that we just recently inked, and we're working on Esurance, Allstate, State Farm, as well as Fidelity Title. So for them, the real value there is a couple-fold. They're looking at it obviously as a lead gen to begin with, but as they've looked at the product, they've seen that there's a lot of value in going through and streamlining their operations. So that's kind of our mentality, is to look at who we're talking to and how can our product go through and actually have actionable effects on their day-to-day. And so for them, they're really looking at the chat engine that we built from scratch, the fact that they don't usually have access to anybody but the consumer, and that they can communicate all with them through their CRM and access the documents they need. That's really very valuable to them. Additionally, our OCR system, they're looking at the fact that we're a little further ahead in the process for a consumer than your typical point of sale, which is where you click here, apply now. We're after that. Basically, after you've clicked here, apply now, filled out an application, the lender exports the data to our system. And so at that point, we have consumers that we know are qualified and are actually going through and buying a home. We can suggest them, hey, would you like a quote? We're obviously not shoving it down their throat, but what we can do is that people who already have insurance, they can actually upload their insurance policy to our system. We can look at their coverage and their premiums and say, hey, we've got a much better quote for you over here. At that point, again, that true apples to apples that's never existed before.
That's great. So the next question is related to this question. How does partnership with corporates lead to potential funding opportunities from their CVC arm?
Yeah, so a good example is Progressive. They have committed to us to be a follow-on investor in our A round. As you mentioned earlier, we are looking for that deal lead, and we've got a few leads on that. Additionally, I think there's a lot of value in having strategics and going through and not only furthering our intentions, but also it definitely helps out with the fundraising cause. Investors want to see that other people in the space believe in what you're doing and see what's going on there, for sure.
That's great. So the last question is, what advice would you give other founders on how to attract CVCs for both partnership and funding?
Well, for me, it definitely depends on what stage you're at. Assuming that there's a lot of founders here that are in earlier stages, still going through and raising their seed funds. Definitely the ideal situation, and it's always as we're trying to find that perfect investor that's going to have connections to the CVCs, that's going to allow us to go through and get together and the future rounds. Ideally, they would invest in your initial round, but as we're seeing, most CVCs are increasing their minimum investment sizes. So that's definitely prohibitive for some early stage investors. And being completely transparent, that was definitely something that was kept in mind as we were raising. As we're now in our A round and we're raising larger amounts, obviously it's a lot easier and we're having more conversations, more meaningful conversations with the CVCs. This is the stage where, when you were doing your seed round, I said, hey, you're a little too early for us, you're a little too early for us. We're finally not too early for them at this point. So it's really kind of flipped the table a bit. At this point, it's more about us finding that perfect investor that we really want to work with and that is able to show us what kind of value they can bring, as well as is going to be an active participant in the growth of the company, not just, hey, here's our money. Go ahead and, we trust you to do what you will with it.
Okay. I just thought of one more question. What is your international expansion plans?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of interesting that a bit ago we were talking about Hong Kong and other groups. So in fact, we actually were recently approached by an Israeli bank that is looking to use RealKey on their end for their mortgage platform. Unfortunately, we built the product so that it is customizable and flexible enough to go through and support other languages and other systems. But Hong Kong specifically, just some of my own personal background is my dad actually was originally from Hong Kong himself. And so is my wife. And so we have a lot of connections there. Additionally, I think that it's important, especially for a company like ours that's in the fintech space, to find a global hub that, I feel like Hong Kong, Singapore, London, obviously all these particular places are not just hubs for the Asian market, the European market, but for really the entire world. So I think that's also very attractive to a lot of VCs, is that they want to see that what is the potential addressable market. Obviously, we start off with smaller initial markets that we're addressing, but seeing that the brand's plan is to actually go after additional larger markets definitely helps out.
That's great. And here we have TDK Ventures from Japan. We are hosting once again SK Group in our next event, who writes billion-dollar checks, and they are some percentage of Korea's GDP. So kind of people, we will have one other person, she runs PR firms and her client is government of Taiwan. So these are how we want to ultimately connect the dots. So Christopher, thank you. We really added luster, and last time Eric with his wildcard entry started the trend, but we are so glad that we picked this trend up and brought the entrepreneurial perspective. So thank you. And what Tech Futures Group told me to say, it's about their program. Our company, Pitch Global, we are a satellite organization of Tech Futures Group, NorCal SBDC, and we have been working with RealKey over the years, and we want other companies to come and get success both in funding and non-dilutive. Actually, we never talked about non-dilutive side, but maybe there's a conversation. Maybe you, me, and Edgar should get on a call once and explore that too, in case because some of the other companies have been pretty successful. On that note, once again, Christopher, thank you. And these people like Andrew or Nathan, they are very connected to other CVCs too from other firms. Like I know Allstate Ventures, and they are also connected to them. So that's where we are gonna get to. Right now it's baby steps, but once again, thanks for your time. And now we'll move on to the next part of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Appreciate it.
Welcome, Christopher. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have the main act for today, which is a brief background. We were, last year we hosted some large investor summits in partnership with some big names. And we fortunately got connected to a lot of corporate venture capital arms. And we started talking to some of the more enlightened ones. And we realized this is the biggest trend in the world, where corporates are becoming investors and they are sprinkling aid and money to a lot of companies. They are investing earlier stage or as well. And we were looking for the right people to start the thought leadership with. And then, and last but not the least, relationships take time to develop. So we had this gentleman a year ago in our summits, and then he came back a couple more times. And I was really struck with his brilliance. And someone who really understands CVC, how CVCs work, how global markets work. He attended MIT and Wharton and was a long-term VC in China before he moved back to Silicon Valley and helped start TDK Ventures. So it's my good fortune and privilege to have today Andrew Mawa, Investment Director of TDK Ventures, to start our second series. We already had the first event where he talked about how entrepreneurs at all stages can attract CVCs. And today he's going to talk about how startups can create value with CVCs, which without value, there's no valuation. As simple as that, one-on-one. So on that note, I hand over the floor to Andrew. Once he's done with the presentation, I'm going to introduce Nathan, and then Nathan and Andrew will discuss for 15 minutes about both Andrew's presentation as well as somewhat about Christopher's presentation. And then I'll hand over the floor to my fellow EIR, Axel Tillman, who will curate the Q&A, take questions from the audience, and then he'll give his final presentation. So on that note, Andrew, floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, KC. So today, first I'll give a brief introduction about TDK Ventures, and then I'll just dive into the material, how to create value with CVCs. So a little bit about TDK Ventures. We're a technology-focused venture fund with offices in San Jose and Boston. We focus on early stage seed, Series A, Series B investments in tech startups that leverage fundamental material science. And we launched in July of 2019. We're managing $200 million, and we invest globally. Here's a look at our core values. I want to highlight the E in core values, the entrepreneurs first. We're focused on adding value to our entrepreneurs. They're the heroes of our story, and they're the core at everything we do. A little bit about TDK. TDK is headquartered in Japan, but has several different lines of business, from different kinds of electronics components, high frequency components, batteries, sensors, and actuators. And we have 7 distinct investment themes, from connectivity to mobility, IoT, health and wellness, robotics, energy, and AR/VR. We strive to add more than just capital. We try to add value to every startup we work with beyond capital, and to help them grow and to lower their risk. Here's a look at the team. Just really excited about this team. We're doing a lot, and we're growing. And here's a brief look at our portfolio companies. I'm not going to go into any detail on these, but we are investing in many different opportunities across all the different investment themes. And all of these startups are very exciting for us, and we work hard to make them successful. Now into the main material. How can startups create value with CVCs? First, I'm going to start off with a slide from the last session where I highlight what is a CVC, what is a corporate venture capital fund. And it's basically a type of investment vehicle that invests in early stage innovative companies, but encompassing 2 different types of aims: financial aims and strategic aims. And almost every corporate venture capital fund has some form of both, to varying extents. So for financial aims, it could be for some kind of financial return. For strategic aims, it could be to help some kind of business. And the key here is almost every single CVC is different. and they're trying to achieve something very different. And so when a startup thinks about, hey, how can I work with a CVC to create value, it's incumbent on that startup to really understand what are the financial aims of the CVC and what are the strategic aims of the CVC. But really, at the end of the day, most startups pursue relationships with CVCs to get access to the larger partners market. There are many different ways to do this. There are many different ways to actually get access to the market and to grow and scale. But really, at the end of the day, it's about the smaller company, typically smaller, figuring out a way to scale and grow. And really, at the start, you have to create the right foundation. And there are just a few things that really need to be there for value creation to happen. The first is sharing goals. And really, at the end of the day, it's understanding the other party's goals. So how can the startup understand the CVC goals, and how can the CVC understand the startup's goals? And really, that's about sharing these things openly and listening and working together to create a shared vision of the future. The second part is after and as you're discussing these shared goals, finding common ground, finding areas where you can work together, finding areas where you see commonalities, finding areas where you think that you can perceive a roadmap for value creation together. And also with that is understanding the areas where you see differences, where you need to spend a little bit more time. And the last part I would say about this foundation is finding the right collaboration approach. What are the ways that you want to work together? What are the initiatives you want to work on? What are the tools that you want to use to make the collaboration work? And this takes time, and it takes open discussion where both the CVC and the startup are sharing with each other. And at the end of the day, you want to uncover areas of value that each party brings to the table. And it's different. Here on the screen, you'll see several areas of value, typical examples of value that corporates bring and startups bring. Obviously, this depends on the particular situation. But by and large, I tend to see the corporates really bringing a lot in terms of sales and distribution, vendor access, information and data. That tends to be big, especially if you're developing something related to AI. Data can be very helpful. Brand perception. So some cases, customers want to work with a big brand that they know will be around for several years. It's harder to work with a startup that may not have the same kind of brand presence. And really, it's also the large user base or customer base that I think a lot of startups want access to, because that helps them scale. And at the end of the day, for a young startup company, scaling is probably one of their biggest priorities, because that's what allows them to create value for more and more customers, and then ultimately create value for their shareholders. And last but not least, corporates do bring capital and resources. That's huge. I think for many, if not all startups, at the end of the day, they need capital to grow. And how they get this capital and who they get this capital from matters. Taking capital from the wrong partners could potentially lead the startup down a path where they're not building the right product or service according to their vision. But partnering with a corporate who understands your vision and can work with you to create a shared vision, in addition to providing capital, can be very beneficial in the long run. And the startups also bring a lot of value in the form of innovative IP. In many cases, startups are at the cutting edge of developing exciting IP that is new to the market. And corporates can see that as an opportunity to learn from the startup. Startups also bring the ability to iterate quickly. I've seen many cases where corporates partner with startups intentionally because the startups are much faster at developing product and iterating around a particular kind of business. That has a lot of value. Startups also bring strong growth potential and the ability to grow very rapidly. And I think for many corporates, being able to partner with startups and leverage those capabilities in terms of fast growth can be very valuable. Next slide. Also want to share that there are many different layers of engagements that you can work with corporates on, and it's not just about the product or the service. It could also be their operations. In many cases, if a startup is developing something that is more efficient, it can incorporate that into the startup's operations. Maybe you have a huge efficiency increase in your operations. Maybe it's manufacturing related. Maybe it's shipping. Maybe it's some other aspect of the business that you do. But these are all fair game. And I think startups should also think about how they can help the corporates improve their operations. Also workforce. I've seen cases where startups with a new vision for how to do HR or how to do worker health and safety can partner with a corporate to add value on that level. And also in terms of partners, many corporates are working with a wide variety of partners, whether vendors or market partners. And startups can also add value to those relationships. So through the startups' help, the corporate can enhance their relationships with their existing partners. And really, we need to look at all the different stages of the engagement, and this varies. So these are just the typical stages. I don't want to say a blanket rule, but it starts out with some initial discussions. That's where you're really understanding each other, the vision, the goals, the ways you want to collaborate. Second phase is going into more due diligence. And this is probably one of the more important ones, if not most important ones, because it's about understanding on a deep level the capabilities, vision, and goals for the startup as well as the corporate, and to see if those align. And due diligence is a very important step and should not be skipped. Stage 3, I think in many cases what we see is both corporates and startups start with some kind of simple collaboration, maybe something very basic, and even maybe a trial. And that kind of builds confidence and then can lead into the 4th stage, which is the full agreement, and that encompasses many different things. Some maybe it could be just a pilot. It could be some kind of simple collaboration. Maybe no money needs to be exchanged. It could be a full-on strategic partnership, a joint development agreement, or even a joint venture. And these are all come with different risks and different levels of engagement, different amounts of time in general to set these agreements up. And as a startup, be aware that in some cases, if you're going after a JDA with a corporate, it could take many months to potentially even years to have something in place. So be patient. In other cases, a pilot might be quicker. It all depends on the scope of the pilot and which teams or departments or organizations you're working with within the corporate. But ultimately, at the end of the day, startups typically want to achieve some kind of agreement where they're actually working together hand in hand with the corporate. And so all across this, there are many different areas that need to be discussed, but I think some of the key points for discussion are going to be scope. What's involved, which technologies, which products, timeline, how long should this last? A year, 2 years, 3 years? Whose branding would be leveraged and how? What are the financial considerations? Is it just investment, or is it investment plus revenues, or some other kind of arrangement? IP, this is really huge. How to manage the startup's IP and how to manage the corporate's IP, how to keep them separate. And this is one area that a lot of time typically needs to be spent on to really understand how that IP is kept separate and how new IP is allocated. Management authorization matrix, really as the engagement continues, how does management authorize various interactions with both the startup and the corporate? Reporting timing and responsibility. So what are the KPIs for success? Who should receive this reporting and when? That's important. And another major one is what are the ways that the startup and the corporate look at terminating the relationship. So these are the key points among others that should be discussed during the process. And these kinds of collaborations and partnerships are not without risk. And so I want to highlight a few of the risks that should be watched out for. For example, different cultures. Perhaps one is more top-down, perhaps one is more hierarchical, perhaps another is more flat. Misalignment of incentives. Perhaps in terms of the goals that the corporate and the startup are trying to achieve, they're looking at different things. There are different milestones or incentives that are pulling them in different directions, and one needs to be aware of that. Another major one is this different risk appetites. In some cases, the corporate may be less risky because they have a brand to protect. In other cases, the startup may be less willing to take risk because they have perhaps a small amount of capital. It depends. So really understanding what those risk appetites are upfront is important. Also, different pace of work. In many cases, startups tend to work fairly fast. Can the corporate keep up? That's an important thing. And it could also be the reverse. I've seen cases where the corporate moves much faster. And so that's something to be aware of. And many others on this list are important. Understand the risks and watch out for them as you're building those relationships. But ultimately, the way to view this collaboration is as a partnership. If both parties come together and treat it as a partnership, and they're open to learn and embrace differerences and overcome those differences, then that will typically lead to more successful collaboration. And one of the key things I want to highlight in building a successful collaboration is making the effort to build trust and mutual respect with every interaction. And that's about even understanding the differences, but overcoming them, embracing the differences, but seeing them not as something to deter you, but something to understand and see how you can adjust the way you do things to work together with your other partners successfully. Both parties should be very supportive and enthusiastic. The entire management team should be on board as much as possible and support the engagement. And lastly, I want to say it's also about communicating as equal partners. Unfortunately, sometimes the relationship tends to see the corporate as the larger, more powerful partner, and the startup is the smaller, weaker partner. And that doesn't help. Those sort of points of view and communicating as such tends to create more differences. And as much as possible, I would advise startups and corporates to avoid this kind of point of view and try as much as possible to see each other as equal partners. And so I think that's it. I think we're going to have Q&A after the talk, my fireside chat with Nathan. So stop sharing.
That's great. So once again, Andrew, thanks for such an illuminating presentation. Even things you mentioned as a passing, like companies have, CVCs have a brand to protect. Let's just take that. That's like 20 seconds of your presentation. But that itself could be a separate, thought leadership event. So, if people, I really hope everyone really listened, because this is really wisdom from the trenches, and you just cannot get it anywhere in the world, because, it takes time. Well, I've read philosophy and all, and, what is knowledge? If that is a very, existential question, I mean, knowledge is knowledge when an expert anoints it as a knowledge. But in such, in Silicon Valley, change is happening so fast that by the time an expert says something is a knowledge, it is devoured by change and it ceases to be knowledge. So how do we bridge this conundrum? Is by having events with the best of the best people, teachers like Andrew and Nathan. And we are really excited to have Nathan Pascarella of Hypertherm Ventures as our guest CVC, who is going to chat with Andrew regarding what Andrew presented, as well as what Christopher Hossein also gave the entrepreneurial perspective. And about Nathan. And it's also important to know how we are connected. He was introduced to us by our board member, Jim Simmons, co-chair of Caltech Angels, and a very well-connected insider in Silicon Valley. And Nathan always, whenever we reach out, he's always there for us, in terms of being a speaker, in terms of being a judge, whatever we want. So that attitude of service definitely is the key. Everything being equal, if a person looks at you as a glass half full, it will be more powerful than someone who's very powerful but has a lot of resource, but you are at the bottom of their consciousness. So Nathan is long-term part of Hypertherm Ventures and comes from very tech background. He's worked for Siemens, he's worked for Teradyne, and he's also co-chair of New Hampshire. That's something new. Really excited. Why don't you briefly share, Nathan, what is that? Because we want to align with, people with different states, like we are doing, Tech Futures Group is doing with Hong Kong. Maybe we can align with New Hampshire, and help them connect with Silicon Valley. So
Yeah, no, thanks for the introduction, Casey. Really appreciate it. And just to the point of New Hampshire Tech Alliance, was recently added to the board of directors for the New Hampshire Tech Alliance, which in a lot of similar ways works with some of the local governmental agencies or other things that are supporting startups. So when Edgar shared some of the things that he was doing with Northern California, business development, those kind of organizations, the New Hampshire Tech Alliance does play into that. We're not far from the Boston ecosystem, so we do have connections there as well. And so that's an appointment that I'm happy to serve on alongside of what I'm doing with Hypertherm Ventures.
that's great. Great. All right. Floor is yours, Nathan and Andrew again. Look forward to the fireside chat. And we have time. If it goes over, it does. So Nathan, why don't you start by asking, making some comments and asking Andrew some questions?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy. So, as it was a great presentation. I think, what you put together, Andrew, is a great summation of all of the different nuances, and even what Casey said. There are a lot of small things, but they're big things within all of those points that were made. And as I listened to the talk, Andrew and I have some overlap in the strategic interest areas that we have. We also have some commonality with our GP in residence in Paul Holland. And so we do share some commonalities, but we also have our differences. One of the things that stood out to me kind of toward the end was one of the things that we are focused on at Hypertherm Ventures is, and I measure the team on and the success of each year that we go through, is how are we supporting the portfolio companies? How are we engaging with them? And kind of the way we were thinking about it was, as the CEOs of those startups write their memoirs someday, as they have a success story to tell, how does the thread of the venture organization, of the CVC, get woven into that? How does that stand out? And the more I interact with our portfolio companies, I think of that very heavily, but I also know there's a balance between, setting that up early, to what Andrew talked about, and making sure that it's defined, it's somewhat well defined, and there's different levels to engage. So, one of the things I just think a lot about is the success of the portfolio company. And I think you, Andrew, you led with, it's the the entrepreneur. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it is about the success of the portfolio company. And if you have that squarely in mind and you're working toward that, I think you'll do well. I think for us at TDK Ventures, that's a critical part of every engagement that we have with startups. It's an understanding. It's through a dialogue, really understanding how can we effectively add value. And it's not just about once in time. It's about across the startup's growth. And I think one of the things I recognized is as you're, and in the presentation I highlighted about it's about building trust and building a long-term relationship. And as you're doing that, you'll uncover more and more about the startup's goals, and they'll also understand more about the corporate's goals. And as you're discussing that and sharing that, new ideas will come to mind. You're like, oh, I didn't know that. Well, perhaps we could think about this. And then they'll say, yeah, maybe we could think about this. And then you say, maybe I can pull in this person and to be part of that discussion. And that creates more and more, that kind of open atmosphere creates more and more opportunities for value creation in the long run. And having that trust relationship is key, because as you're discussing these things, you're not really worried that the big corporate will swallow you whole and ruin all your chances. You're thinking about it more as, hey, this is a real partner. They're going to help us be successful in the long run. And at the heart of that is building that relationship. So I'm just like you. That's something that's very important to us at TDK Ventures. And we strive every day to add more and more value. One of the things that I know you put in a lot of effort in the engagements with startups you work with. Do you have any memorable examples or stories of engagements that you thought were especially incredible that you think could be helpful for the audience today?
Yeah, no, that great question. Yeah, it's funny because kind of phase 3 of how I'm going to answer this question just came true yesterday. But one of the things, just to kind of level set everyone, again, I know Hypertherm is a smaller company. We're based in New Hampshire. We focus on only in advanced manufacturing, the ecosystem around the fabrication and the finishing and the creation of larger goods, industrial goods, agricultural, heavy industry. We do touch on a lot of different areas. But the story that comes to mind for me is, as we've been able to engage within certain of our interest areas, one unique thing about the company is that the company is 100% employee owned. We are an ESOP, one of the larger ones in the country. And, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is that over 53 years, there's never been a layoff. There's a no layoff philosophy. It's not a policy, it's a philosophy. But we really encourage workers as owners to come up with new ideas, to be more efficient, to improve. And one of our portfolio companies, we were exploring doing some of that early work that you talked about, Andrew, in the sense of, what does it look like? What are we thinking of doing? We were able to kind of talk about, what is Hypertherm? How do we interact? How do we work? And really there was a 3-level approach to an engagement that we sketched out. And when we do, similar to what you do, when we think about the capital, the financial piece that gets invested, we also try to lay out, and we have a separate document, that what is the value beyond cash. Let's talk about that. Let's define what that looks like. And, from the, just the value beyond the cash, we set some limits, we define some boundaries. And then there are bigger things like, JDAs and JVs that maybe also come later. But we try to lay that out, and we laid that out with this company. And the first part was just around our workers, right? We think about operations, like you called out, and we have a technical training institute. So the first thing that we laid out was just, hey, our technical training institute could take on you're rolling out this product, this training regimen for your customers. Let our technical institute take that on. Let them go through the training. Let them give you the feedback and improvement to enhance your training. It helped our team take on some new skills, but also gave the startup some key feedback to have improvements. And then the second phase was to work with our operations, do a pilot with operations, where the operational group within Hypertherm, and again, probably similar to TDK, CVC makes an introduction to the operating units or the business teams for pilot potentials or opportunities. And we did that, and that enhanced again, feedback into the startup to improve the product, but also to our own operations folks to implement some new technology. And then the one that just happened yesterday was there are problems and challenges both for the startup and for Hypertherm, our corporate, in the sense of there is a potential problem to work on together. And so seeing the business team members and the startup in the same meeting yesterday that I helped to facilitate was really awesome. I mean, I told our sponsor, our leader on the executive team, Aaron Brandt, I said, to see the startup interacting with our team, just to see the innovative mindsets that were flowing back and forth around a potential common problem was really powerful. So that's really a great story in my mind. It's one of the early stories, and I hope there's more of them.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I really like that story. And similar to you, I enjoy seeing meetings where I see folks from TDK and I see startups working together and really just free-flowing ideas and working together to create value. It reminds me of one startup we invested in that really is developing a technology product, but so many different aspects of what their product does touches on a variety of business units within TDK. And so we actually have a role on our team called Startup Liaison, and it's his responsibility to help connect our portfolio companies with the various business units across TDK, and there are many, as you undoubtedly saw from that slide. And he did an excellent job. And I think that, it wasn't just, so it was sensors team, it was batteries, power electronics, mapping, and it got to be so huge. We did a kickoff. It was basically almost an entire day of everybody meeting together in person. This was back before COVID. And just as you shared, free-flowing ideas, just really talking about, hey, how can we help here? How can we improve this? And I think that through that discussion, we really did get the sense that we were building trust. We were building a strong partnership, and that partnership continues today as we continue to build on that, not just in terms of product, but in terms of also other initiatives for the future across many of the areas that you highlighted. So that was very exciting for us.
Yeah, no, and I was also going to think about too. You had mentioned the aims of the CVC, and that's a great thing to point out. And that there's a balance, right? Every one of us has slightly different measures of how that goes. We lean heavier toward the strategic side, the strategic learning to expose, the existing businesses or the company to potential future directions, future expansion of multi-technology within the ecosystems that we focus on, or to think about disruptions or what are potential disruptions that are ahead. And I think there's a difference in how you engage with the various portfolio companies, depending on those motivations as well.
Absolutely. And just like Hypertherm, TDK Ventures also focuses a lot on learnings and understanding what those disruptions are. And what I find is as we're engaging with our portfolio companies, and we share with them openly, hey, these are some of the things that we're thinking about. These are some things we're looking at and we want to learn. All of them are very open in terms of, hey, let's find different ways where we can share some of that with you, or we can help build understanding and learning, because it also benefits them, because in the process, they're also kind of learning of, hey, here's what, let's call it a large established company as TDK. Here's what TDK is thinking about. Here's what TDK is experiencing and seeing. And at the same time, they share as a startup, here are some of the disruptions that we're seeing in the market. And again, you get that free flow of ideas, the sharing that ends up creating value for all parties. And so that, I think, is very beneficial. We strive to achieve that in every instance. And as we meet with startups, just really sharing that with them, we almost always seem to the startups seem to appreciate that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that we're closer on time. The one of the other thought that I just wanted to share, given the fireside chat nature here, is just this idea of, I know you and your team and the team that we have at Hyperthon Ventures, we're always out networking and looking for opportunities, and we are always reaching out and engaging with startups as much as we can. But the other important thing to us is just really having strong relationships and partnerships with institutional venture that have similar areas of interest, and where we show the value to the startups that can be brought in concert with, those really, world-class leading venture firms that have an interest in the same spaces.
Yeah, totally agree. I think for us, it's about partnering with other CVCs, building syndicates, but more so sort of bringing all those relationships and leveraging those relationships to add more value to startups. And I've seen just in general across the board, the startups share their appreciation for that, and I think that's typically what they're looking for, because in many cases, startups have come to me and they said, hey, we don't want to be wed to a single corporate. Everybody in the market is going to think, hey, we're only working with this one corporate. And they say, and because of that, we're intentionally deciding to work with anyone, and let the market know that, so that at the end of the day, it'll enable them to grow much bigger and go much further than if they were just considered to be just solely working with this one corporate. And I think we encourage that. A lot of times startups have come to me and said, hey, do you mind if we work with your competitor? And the way our vision is, we want to work with startups that are developing and growing and doing amazing things. And so we don't put restrictions on who they can and cannot work with. We want them to make the decisions of who they want to work with, and we want to support them. And so many startups have told me they find that refreshing and different from some cases. But we think that for us, it's all about bringing them value and adding them value. And so we avoid these kinds of restrictions. Oh, you can't do this, you have to do that. We don't do any such thing.
That's great. I have a quick comment too, Nathan. You raised very important point, working with institutions, other VCs. That's where Pitch Global, we come in, because people we have on our board are Silicon Valley, very insiders. Apart from Jim, we have a couple others. We have one person, Shasha Johnson. She was Tim Draper's partner for their Russia fund with Russia's biggest bank. And we are promoters of her conference too, which happens last Thursday and Friday of October. And there, every time there is the heads of funds like IVP, NEA, they're all there. So I'll make sure, we carve out we get you and Andrew invited to that conference and send you the details. It's called GTS conference. So on that note, I'm gonna hand over the floor to my fellow EIR, Axel Tillman, who in his previous life ran Fund of Funds. He was US CEO for Overseas Fund of Funds. He's going to curate the Q&A, because we have, Pitch Global, we are a satellite of Tech Futures Group, US government agency. So some of the clients we are mentoring, we mentor them jointly. And that's really worked, because sometimes, as they say, two heads are better than one. Sometimes I miss a point, Axel takes over. He misses a point, I take over. So together, the mentoring's been very powerful. And I particularly see one person who really wants advice on how to connect with CVCs, and especially in the travel sector, David Urbanik. So get your question ready. And I hand over the floor to Axel. I think the next 10 minutes can be Q&A, could be more. And then he will give his presentation on how we attracted Rico. And before he gives that presentation, I just want to say how we attracted Rico, because he's going to talk more about how he helped Rico spin off their non-core medtech division into separate company, which ultimately got also raised funding through a co-founder found through our network. So one day through LinkedIn, someone reaches out to me because this person was head of RICO in India. He just got transferred here with the goal of getting spinning off the non-core division. And I told Axel, and we got another of our investors, Robert Winter, who we have made famous because he very casually mentioned to us one day that he was early investor in NVIDIA. And I told him, how much was the total return? And he said it's like 8,000x or 9,000x. And I said, okay, let's create a speech for you, how I made 10,000x ROI as an early investor in NVIDIA. And we pushed him to be a speaker in several conferences we are involved with. So, we made him famous. So he had to pay back time. And so we roped him in and he went and closed RICO. RICO was on the verge of picking some other companies to work with. But when they saw, Axel's expertise and when they saw someone like Robert Winter, who has made, who has 75% success rate in Silicon Valley, they handed the project to us. And Axel worked with them for almost a year. So this is also a very, very important part of the CVC pie. So you will all hear that story. So on that note, Axel, floor is yours. And let's have the Q&A. David, hopefully you're ready for some questions.
Thank
All
you
right.
so much, Casey. Wonderful introduction. And I'd like to kick it off. Nathan and Andrew, tell me please about the sentiment in today's environment in the VC community. I remember that corporate VCs were often negatively looked at 10 years ago. You probably agree when you look back in the past. I hear from your interactions and your desires that this actually has changed. Startup companies should no longer be afraid to actually receive funding from CVCs. What's your viewpoints?
I guess I'll just jump in first. We're a younger fund as well. And so, one of the things that I think that we've learned over time is that, yes, there is a different behavior among the corporates. We really have been developing and trained to behave in a similar manner to work alongside of the other institutional funds. And so I think there has been a history in the past, but I do think there's another wave. There's another phase of corporate venture where there is acknowledgement of the strategic value that is brought into the mix and the way that corporates set themselves up, if in the right manner, if you will, is in a way where we actually become strong partners with those institutional other investors.
Andrew?
Yeah, completely agree with Nathan on that. Most of the startups that I talk to are looking for a blend of institutional financial VCs as well as CVCs. And some of them they confide in me, just a few will say they prefer working with corporates because corporates can either help them with their product or help them scale, which they feel like at their given stage is more valuable to them. It all depends on their perspective. I think others are looking for a big check. And for that, you may want to spend more time with the institutional financial VC, but for others that are looking more for growth and scaling and help with their product, they really want to work with corporates.
David, I see that you unmuted your microphone, so it seems to me you are ready for your question.
Sure, I'll give you one and you can roll with it however you like. We're in a unique, I was going to say we're in a unique situation, but that's patently not true. We're in that altogether too common situation where while we'd love to raise venture, we are very early stage. We've got an amazing technology that's significant. It's conversational AI, so it's about natural language understanding. It's significantly different than other approaches because we're basically building a meaning core based upon cognitive and linguistic science. And that meaning core we need to grow so that Pat, our creation, understands features of language like transactions. If I sell something to you, now you have it. That's implication. Another thing would be generalization. Another thing would be disambiguation. So there's these sorts of capabilities. There's also a set of predicates and reference you need for any particular use case. There's the words that are used and how they're used. So rather than just having a technology that needs to scale through more hardware or more coding, more engineering, we have a core that needs to be built out for a particular use case, and we're looking for some use cases to do that. What we're finding is that the corporates, more than usual, are averse to investing in the development of anything. They want ready now. It's a rough world out there. Tell me what you can sell me now that I can use this quarter. And so my question is, what's your advice in terms of identifying a proof of concept opportunity where there's some willingness to look at a 9 to 12 month time frame for proof of concept go to market? Anyone? Bueller?
I can jump in. I think so. First, understanding the stage you're at is key, and I think you've articulated that. And perhaps, yeah, some of the corporates you've spoken to were not able to help given the stage that you're at. But I want to challenge the notion that there's no corporate out there that can help, because I personally know of at least 3 or 4 that have specific programs for helping incubate startups at stages that as what you describe. And their desire is to work more closely with the startups to help them develop and build out more of their platform. Now, in your specific case, and the ones I'm thinking about are more deep tech related, so it probably wouldn't apply.
Well, I got to say, what we've got is very deep tech, because it has the possibility of transforming NLU, which would transform multiple market application arenas. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so I think basically what I'm saying is there are CVCs out there that do have the capabilities to help startups at a similar stage that you're at. And I think it's just more about, finding the ones that are the good fit. That's one thing. The second is you don't necessarily have to rely on corporates. I think in some cases you may even want to kind of build out some of that yourself. Whether you have the capital or not, that's another question. But in many cases, I've heard of entrepreneurs where they say, well, this part of the business, they don't want to wait for they don't want to wait for a corporate, and they don't want to have to rely on a corporate. They'd rather kind of build out some pieces themselves because they move much faster and they're more sure of what's going into it. So, if capital is an issue, that's one thing. If it's resources, if it's talent, there are other ways of getting those kinds of resources. I guess what I'm trying to say is, there's a lot of different directions that you could go and achieve ultimately what you're trying to achieve. It's just a matter of, I would suggest kind of looking at many different fronts and seeing, given a cost benefit analysis, which tends to work better.
I appreciate your input. I will say the co-founders have bootstrapped a decade of R&D to the tune of about $4 million. And we have talked to angel, venture, and corporates. So we are taking exactly the approach you recommend, which feels good to hear it validated. But anything you could suggest in terms of friendly ears would be greatly appreciated. Actually, I should say we've had very many friendly ears. We just haven't had friendly wallets yet.
But you don't expect a term sheet tonight, right? Or today?
Nope, not today.
Okay, Nathan, your feedback?
Where Andrew jumped there too, like this incubator thought process. It's not in the same space as you, but we have a group that works alongside of us that helps to test out and really not be part of the core business, but off to a development side that is a vehicle that can help try and test out use cases and do some early proofs of concept work with either technologies or with the startups. So not in your space, but definitely the thought of other incubators. Is there an opportunity even with some of those local or regional incubators that might have an opportunity to be partnered up there? would be my thoughts.
Great. Thank you so much, David. I see in the chat that Sasha has a question that she wants to ask to Andrew. Sasha, unmute yourself and show yourself to the audience, and we are ready for you.
I'm not she, I'm here.
Okay,
but okay, my question is to Andrew Maiva. How we can connect, how we can approach them, because TDK Ventures looks like a very interesting investor for deep tech startup, and what we have a really revolutionary technology, and we are looking for, we are fundraising right now. So this is my question.
Thank you so much, Sasha. Andrew, how are you approachable?
Yeah, so, and I think I even said this at the last session. Basically, the only way to reach me is through a warm intro. I get people every day messaging, people emailing me, and I mean, I think really at the end of the day, for me, it's about building a relationship, and that's through a warm intro. That's it.
So,
Okay.
Andrew, tell our audience how many business proposals, business plans, pitch decks do you see in a given year?
Thousands.
Thousands. You see, most people don't realize how many of those come over somebody's desk every single year. And it's pretty hard in your workload that you have to actually cater to all of these. And everybody expects I have the greatest idea in the world. Andrew needs to answer. And that is not really the case, Andrew, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think the difficulty is I get many requests every single day. And I think that the signal that I'm looking for is folks want to build a relationship. If someone messages me and say, I need money, send me money, that's not the signal I'm looking for. That means that somebody wants money. They don't want a relationship.
No, in our case, we don't need money, and we don't need such money, just money. We don't need such money.
Thank you, Sasha. Nathan, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I feel I'm a little bit younger than Andrew in the role, but it has gotten to the point where you do see a lot of things coming through. So the idea of the warm intro or the relationship building is important. Myself personally, I always try to keep a very open, possible mindset, like see what the potential possibility is of what a startup is working on. But the one thing that I do try to do as best I can is to try to give feedback, right? If there is a relationship and we've started to work together, try to give some of that feedback as to, look, if it's not going to work out, just be really direct and try to explain why. But that helps. And then also try to refer or point to other options or opportunities.
And Casey, are we correct that we have room for one more question from the time?
Yes, we have room for one or two more questions. For
Okay,
sure.
good. So I see Uday, you unmuted yourself. Does it indicate you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. We're a SaaS B2B startup targeting the 400 million small businesses. We are somewhat like MailChimp. MailChimp is now, they have about 16 million customers and 700 million is their revenue. They're into marketing. We're into automating their revenue. I have two questions. One, we surprisingly, unexpectedly, have received inquiries from several sources about a white label solution. White label solution, a shopping mall approached us, said, we've used your product, we love it. Can you do it for the whole shopping mall? A marketing agency said, yes, we've used your product for one or two customers, it's good. Can you create a white label solution for a marketing agency? And then a small global retail chain out of Malta came back to us and said, 3 of our stores have used your solution. We love it. Can you create a white label solution? My first question is, should we even think about creating a white label solution, because it takes us into a different business model, completely and stick with our sale of one-to-one as per our original current model, each small businesses direct sales through platforms? My second question is, we would end up with millions of businesses and tens of millions of consumers. And I'm thinking of, if we were to approach corporate for funding now, which type of corporate ventures should we approach? For example, one thing that comes to my mind is a bank, a large bank like Citibank or Santander, who would be very happy to get a very large number of businesses and consumers together. Whom should we approach? Is there any source where we can go to and get a short list? Thank you. Those are my two questions.
Andrew, Nathan, who wants to give it a shot?
Axel, I think this is a very large and pertinent question. Why don't you talk to Uday offline? Because you're good with the consumers and all that.
Sure, absolutely. I love to.
Uday, why don't you email axel@pitchglobal.com and he will get on a call with you.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll do that.
Okay, perfect.
John.
All right. So, Axel, floor is yours.
You have a question?
Yeah, I have are there any more questions? And David, I thought of saying something. Since David is looking for connections with deep tech incubators, but he has some traction with travel companies. So there are companies like Amadeus and others who have strong CVC arms, even though they are in Europe. So maybe he can even approach domain experts if normal getting into very deep tech oriented companies is not working out. So maybe that could be a possibility too for David. I mean, we know David because he's part of our mentoring program too for Tech Futures Group SBDC. Just a thought. All right, Axel, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Back.
Okay. John, there was a question.
Hi, John Derrick. I've actually done a number of startups through the years. I would say the last 10 years or so have been more focused, largely working with startups that have been coming out of raw research. So like Yale University, University of Washington, things like that. But generally at a much, I would say, deep tech level, machine learning, manufacturing processes, that sort of stuff. And you mentioned relationship before, because this is actually across multiple companies. What's a good way of just establishing that relationship with your firm? There was a former partner of yours that left, and that's the way I used to interact, discuss, but would be glad to, figure out who a good follow-up would be.
Andrew, that was, yeah.
I'm sorry, former partner?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, someone I used to work with used to be at TDK Ventures. I might have it wrong. Could be wrong. Different corporate firm. But I've worked with venture partners out of Intel, SK Telecom. Actually, that might have been Toshiba. I apologize. Toshiba Ventures, wrong company. So my bad. So, but generally, I work with companies, currently work with Innovation Crossroads out of Oak Ridge Labs, Yale University EIR. So I see a lot of early stage projects, technologies, and then generally try to use my background contacts to get them hooked into the right companies. So for something like that, who's a good contact point on your side? I've already reached out on LinkedIn during the call, but I'll follow up later, I guess.
I would strongly recommend a warm intro. I think that's the best way to connect with folks. I think cold contact is typically, I find, not the better way to go. You could get results with that.
So.
But I strongly recommend a warm intro. I think that will help out a lot more.
Yeah, maybe reach out to startups@pitchglobal.com and an intro to someone. Startups.
Sorry, I'm really not looking. I'm not looking for new startups to work on. I've got enough already. My question was, And this is, I'm trying to warm up the intro, right? So I'm having the conversation now with you guys to see, this is what I do. This is how, different companies I've worked with. Should I just reach out to you guys directly over LinkedIn and start that conversation, start sharing information?
First, reach out to Axel at pitchglobal.com. Then it would be the warm intro.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, so let me launch one other question that I have worked with Samsung Ventures. And Samsung's investment philosophy is a longer process because they will require that almost buy-in from every department. When there is a positive feedback coming, then their investment decision is easier to be made. Is this the same philosophy for both of you, Nathan and Andrew, or can you react more agile?
I'll step in. We're a smaller company. We try to be more agile, but we have a very tight, smaller investment committee that does review and really approve on investments. So it's not like we have to have every business unit on board. We do have some autonomy there, but it does go through an investment committee. That's not a large committee, but large enough to make a good decision for the company and the size we are.
Great. Andrew?
I think it's basically the same as Nathan. Very similar process. So.
Okay, perfect. So I don't see any further questions coming up. So let me transition over now to our case study, which was a spin out of a big corporation. And partially it plays actually in what both of you, Andrew and Nathan, already spoke about. The biggest initial challenge that I faced is that a spin out from a bigger corporation is actually not equivalent to a startup company. And I give you actually one eye-opening example. When I came actually in and talked about value proposition, going to market strategy, and what was very impressive, the company had spent close to $20 million in R&D, of which probably half applied to the ultimate product. The other half had to be taken because they had to pivot out what they were initially doing. But the amount of money being spent, and then understanding that they initially had actually also a customer, made me extremely happy. So I said, everybody in the venture community loves a good story when there are customers paying customers. What happened actually, which I didn't actually realize in the very beginning, they had lost their customer, and not because the customer was unhappy, but because the corporate rules, the legal department did not want to renew the customer's contract for another 3 years, not knowing whether they are succeeding on the spin out or not, and didn't want to have the restrictions associated with this if they would have had the customer. So when you look at the standard startup company, you actually say, wow, any customer that I can get is good for me to actually foster the story and get the venture community excited. Unfortunately, they had denied this. So I believe there is a lesson to be learned for corporates. If you actually have development that potentially needs to be spun out, I wonder whether they are not very well advised to actually make this in a legal, isolated space by creating an incubator space in which they can live without tainting the legal environment and the legal and corporate rules that the big corporation actually puts forward. So that was a major obstacle to overcome. Then the next obstacle was the management team. And I believe Andrew and Nathan and many of us here can really understand that it is a different job if you work for a big corporation and compared to working in a startup company. I always joke, I was the senior VP of sales and marketing, but at the end of the day, I packaged the product that we sold to make it out the door, because as a young, smaller entrepreneurial company, you do what you need to do to get the stuff out. And I always joke, not to put down any company, but we always said, if you come from IBM, you will never survive because you have a secretary for this, you have an administrator for this, and that doesn't exist. You have to be everything yourself. So the mentality that VCs are looking forward to in a corporate, somebody coming from a corporate job was not really that sellable to the VC community. So one of the jobs, besides making the pitch look very nice in the correct way on understanding going to market strategy, where I will talk about, it was very, very important that we also had influence to actually form the management team. And that was a major task, which delayed us by 3 to 4 months in the entire process, because we cannot actually make VC meetings when we don't have the right team. One man shows are not a team. As good as the person was which was leading the effort, we needed to get other partners involved in order to do this. And they need to be sold first onto this venture to sign on so that we can jointly go to the VC community. After we have solved this problem, we now had to go into the nitty-gritty detail. And this is a lesson that whether you come from big corporate, whether you're a startup company, you need to actually really deeply learn to understand how you can demonstrate your idea to be successful out in the marketplace. Number one, what were you actually selling and why were you selling it? And we often talk about telling a story, which of course is easier for a startup entrepreneur than for somebody who had under the umbrella of a corporate developed an idea. But we need to find the spark, why this was actually a very important thing that they were bringing to market and how they stumbled across. And they stumbled actually across their problem solution for the market by being initially in the wrong market and figured out in conversations with customers what the market was really looking for. This is a very, very important lesson for many companies. I find far too often that companies go out and spend a lot of money on R&D to create product, while you could actually prototype a product with a PowerPoint and start talking to 50 or 100 companies to get feedback whether what you're building actually has any merit to the company. And I tell even a story that is coming not from this spin out, but one of my experiences, a startup company was trying to do something and I said to the CTO, hey, wait a minute, let me talk to about 50 CTOs in the corporate world and figure out what their problems are. Ultimately, I came up with an extremely well-designed new solution. And the sad part was that the CTO said, this is so primitive that I will not be part of this company if you ask me to build this product. So unfortunately, I let myself go out of the door because I couldn't believe in a complex product that nobody was asking for because the CTOs already had told me what they were looking for. So we did this at Ricoh in very detail. We interviewed companies, we interviewed the marketplace to fully understand whether our working thesis of what they were looking for had actually a merit. After we learned this, we actually had to go and build a plan about it. Here comes the market sizing. So many companies come out and say, we are catering to this $100 billion marketplace. And if we just catch 1% of the marketplace, we are already a $1 billion company. That is not true. The truth of the matter is that we needed to identify who is our first target market and why. And we came up with an interesting algorithm that we could easily display on a single slide. There is the market need. There is the market readiness that you have to put in consideration. And there was also the willingness to listen actually to the new opportunities that they wanted to embark on. To give you a little bit background, the healthcare insurance market is changing. Corporate America more and more is going to self-insured plans. We understood this pretty well. So what is the sweet spot for a company, even if it is a big spin out, the sweet spot for a company that goes to market at that point in time? The sweet spot is not the 100,000 employee single location, because as a small startup companies, nobody will believe you right away that you can cater to this marketplace. So we needed to find the small and medium-sized business opportunity large enough to be financially rewarding for the company itself, but small enough to not be potentially doubted that you could not deliver on this higher end part of the business. And once we have identified this, we needed to find out in which vertical industry we needed to go in first. Where was the highest desire to solve problems? And it was not just cost driven, that we were able to help these companies to lower their healthcare costs. It was actually ultimately a driving force to find out that there was an associated problem that we could solve extremely well in this initial marketplace. So this entire discussion process, as much as people wanted to get this done in a couple of weeks, took us over 3 months, because we had to work very often together, come up with the idea, revalidating what we learned from the marketplace. And this is a lesson not only for the corporate spin-out, it's also for the startup company. There is in your funding game, in your funding efforts, there is no overnight sensation. Really, there is no overnight sensation. I tell everybody, expect it to be a 9-month process. And the lesson here from the corporate spin-out is it didn't matter that you actually spun out from a big multi-billion-dollar company that did not give any credit to the venture community to whom we talked. We had to stand on our ground, maybe even harder on our ground than actually a normal startup company, because the VC community also asked themselves, whoa, if that's so great, you have 20-something patents, why are you spinning out? And that needed to be also manifested why the company had no place within the big corporate organization. And to highlight this, why it didn't have a place, was also very simple. Initially, they believed that their huge sales force was a great accelerator selling this new technology solution into the marketplace. The reality was that they are not talking to anybody in their customer world that was actually responsible for the product that they created. So the entire sales force, this entire sales organization they had did not have any leverage and any customer relationship that they needed. Now this reminds me of an acquisition I went through. At one point in time, we were selling network configuration management technology. And we learned initially the hard way, despite that we had a little security aspect, the people approving the process were the networking guys in the corporations and not the security guys. But the security story was so interesting that the security company acquired us. And lesson number 1, don't fire the existing organization, in our case, our sales organization, which were independent manufacturers reps, without actually understanding what the company did. So they fired our reps and there was no more new deal flow coming in. They believed that their 120 plus sales organization would absorb it. And despite that, I initially tried to tell them, you know, you're talking to the wrong people with the entire sales organization. They did not listen. So they didn't get the traction. It took them a whole full year before they actually came out and understood that they needed to create a new sales organization. A year lost in a very good product market segment. So here the same thing. In the corporate spin out, the entire sales force was not capable of selling to the market, and we had to recreate the entire storyline at that point in time. And yes, Andrew and Nathan were both absolutely correct. Cold sending emails to any venture firm is a useless exercise. Sometimes you may even get invites, but the invites come typically from associates and not from the partners. And they are just trying to spend their time or maybe listen to a storyline that maybe they're giving them insights into already some of their existing investments. The lesson here for the corporate as well as for the startup company is you need to do your due diligence. Money is not everything. So don't even reach out on LinkedIn to Andrew if you cannot actually really leverage and understand why Andrew's venture arm, the CVC arm, is actually the correct arm you need to talk to. What is the compelling reason that they should actually listen to any of your storyline? Or Nathan, why is there a synergy in your opinion? And then use LinkedIn and find people that he might be connected to there where you are on level 1 connected, whom you can tell the storyline. And if you convince them, they may be able to make the so-called warm introduction to Andrew. I often like to volunteer and do this, but I use also a filter system. If I'm not convinced about the storyline, then I cannot make the warm introduction because it is very simple. In the long run, even Andrew would not listen to me anymore if I make warm introductions that are all not very, very good. As a matter of fact, I made one today for him, and I only asked the question, is this actually in your wheelhouse, before I go into any further detail, because that's a very, I don't need to introduce anybody blindly with CCing the person, and then it's not the right thing. So we have to be very careful. So I went the same route. I didn't know many of the needed VCs that are in the space for Rico, but I had a good network. So I reached out and talked to a variety of people who pointed me then to the right VCs, made the warm introductions, and we made our round. And ultimately, we got our storyline in the right way. And I ultimately were then able also to rely on a few connections that I had myself. Now, here's another lesson to be learned. The corporate environment said, we want to meet 50 VCs in 2 weeks. I said, this is not going to work. We're going to meet one VC and listen to the meeting and listen to the feedback. Once we have understood whether the feedback is valuable, we pivot our pitch and refine it to a way that it masters the objections that we heard the first time around. Because while I personally think I'm pretty good on going to market strategy, I don't know everything. As Casey earlier said, two pairs of eyes is better than one pair of eyes. I actually believe 100 pairs of eyes in a collaborative meeting is better than just 1 or 2 pairs of eyes. So I use a strategy when I go out, and this was no different. I used a strategy that I went to one VC and one angel meeting, and then we sat back down again and discussed how valid the objections were, and then we put the next piece into place. And lo and behold, after about 2 months of these feedback loops, we finally got the traction. And here's the saddest part of the story. Day one, I came in and said, we need to spin out now. We need to have all the documentation. We have to have the IP transfer done, because when we get desire from the VC community to invest, it is not the right time to start the spin out at that point in time. This was completely ignored. And I guess Andrew just nodded. You understand what the outcome of this storyline was. When we got close to a term sheet, we need to travel to Japan and discuss how the legal spin out works. and which something that was supposed to be a 1 to 2 week process turned out to be a 3-month process. And by the time my very hot VC had no more opportunity to invest in that given year, because we went into September and the other deals became more important, and we had to wait until the next year to reopen the conversation. And it was basically like opening up the conversation from scratch. Fundamental mistakes. What you learn from this, have all your ducats in the row, which means management team, marketing plans, all of this needs to be firm before you waste any VC's time. And I was a little bit under pressure, otherwise I wouldn't even have done the introductions. But at the end of the day, I was initially assured that it's only a 1 or 2 week process. So I let myself talk into, let's go and find the investor rounds, and then we're going to do the spin out, which I will never do in my life again. I always learn my lessons and do this the next time differently. I will insist on you do this not ahead of time. I am not the right person to work with, because it came precisely how I predicted the outcome would be. So this was a very interesting time. I learned a lot, again, from the corporate world. I personally never worked in corporate. My entire life is startups, and I will continue to do nothing else but startups. This is my entire life. This is what makes me live in a vibrant environment. What I enjoy working with Casey and Pitch Global is I can listen to many different verticals, wrap my mind around it, and understand all the various ins and outs of the various marketplaces. This is really what I desire for my life, because it keeps me active and keeps me constantly involved with absolutely new business ideas and new solutions for the marketplace. I think I have reached my time limit. Yes, I did. So I'm opening up for any questions that you want to have to the storyline. Anybody? I don't see any mics opening up. Yeah, then I will conclude today's session, and I open up the floor again for TFJ. Are you there? Edgar, are you still there, or did you leave the session already? Let me see here on the screen. Edgar. No, Edgar seems to be gone. So I wish everybody a wonderful weekend. It's always great to be with everybody, with all the startup communities. Casey already previously mentioned axel@pitchglobal.com. This is how startup companies, how also CVCs, corporates can reach me. I'm always open to talk and dedicate my time, because this is what I dedicate my life to. Thank you so much for your participation today. We are looking forward to the next time. There will be a Pitch Global later in the month with interesting startup companies pitching again. I'm sad personally, on the beginning of September, we wanted to have our first in-person event in Southern California. Given on the new flood in the so-called pandemic, we had stopped the in-person event, and will redo this beginning of next year. A wonderful weekend to everybody. Thank you so much again. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you,
Thank
Axel.
you, Axel.
Thank you.